My name is Jay Hubbard, and I'm the Automotive Collections Manager here at the National Automobile Museum. And today I want to discuss with you the care and preservation of the less seen areas of our treasures, the beating heart of our artifacts. Is there more to putting away an automobile than just shutting off the engine and walking away? Well, if you're not coming back to that car for a couple of months/years, then yes, there's a lot more. Whether I'm placing an automobile on display or putting it into deep storage, the long-term preservation of the working parts of the automobile begin as soon as you shut off the ignition, while the engine is still warm, while the fluids are still in circulation. The same can be said for your personal collection, whether it's one car or a dozen. If you're not operating that machine regularly, then it's in storage. And while we all know that winter shutdowns and maintenance can sometimes lead to long-term maintenance, and one thing can lead to another, and your favorite tour car is up on blocks, and well, you're driving something else. That car is now in storage. And whatever the reason that car is in storage, many a gremlin can appear while we're not looking. Inspect the automobile's engine compartment and undercarriage. Collected deposits of dirt and grease and other debris is just as harmful underneath as they are on top. Deposits of dirt and desiccated grease will become places where moisture can collect and attack the metal parts that those deposits can cling to. Petroleum products can attack and dissolve rubber bushings, hoses, boots, and seals. Today's fresh oil sprays are tomorrow's greasy messes and rubber destroyers. Although cleaning the undercarriage and the engine bay will slow the deterioration of many components and make the automobile easier to maintain, after cleaning, remember to lubricate all of the joints and fittings to displace any cleaning fluids that may have found their way in. The automobile engine is a violent environment of fire, poisonous gases, and chemicals, as well as extreme temperatures, a crucible that creates corrosive chemicals that will damage internal parts of your engine. We need to neutralize that environment before putting away the engine. Starting with the cooling system, a thorough draining and flushing of the system, and then what? Refill it with name brand antifreeze? The manufacturer of most name brand antifreezes will tell you that their product contains rust inhibitors that will protect your engine. What most people don't know is that without regular stirring and routine replacement, the rust inhibitor will settle and decay, leaving your engine unprotected. Let us consider this Wisconsin engine found in a Stutz automobile, typical in construction to many engines built in the early 20th century. It's a pretty thing. But note the aluminum crankcase attached to the iron cylinders, topped with brass water jackets and an aluminum water manifold. These dissimilar metals, all bolted together with steel, could lead to a condition called galvanic corrosion, where the metals, when exposed to an electrolyte, will become a kind of battery, swapping electrons with one another until the sacrificial metal, in this case the aluminum, dissolves away. To combat this attack on the metals in your engine, we're going to eliminate the primary culprit, the electrolyte, the water. The last coolant we will fill the cooling system with is a 40-to-1 mixture of water and water-soluble oil. After circulation will be drained off following the last time we run the engine. Water-soluble oil is easily obtained at your local auto parts dealer or can be purchased in bulk at most machine tool suppliers. The lubrication system. For this we're going to refer to Lycoming and Continental, makers of piston-driven aircraft engines and whose recommendations must stand up to the demanding world of powered flight and the scrutiny of the FAA. They recommend that engine oil be drained, filters changed, and the crankcase refilled with fresh oil. Then the engine can be run for up to 1 hour or until the engine oil reaches a minimum temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit. This will ensure that all the internal components of the engine are coated with oil in a protective coating of oil. Then sustained temperature will vaporize any water and raw fuels that may be hiding in your engine. During the last few minutes of this final engine run, you should be spraying the engine with fogging oil or pouring cylinder oil into the carburetor until a thick smoke is visible from the exhaust pipe. This will coat the engine, valve train, and cylinders with a protective layer of oil. That mixture of oil and water-soluble oil has gotten to a real good circulation by now. After final engine shutdown and before it cools, bags or containers of silica gel should be placed in the openings of the engine, inside the air filter housing or carburetor throat, the crankcase vents, and exhaust tailpipe. These openings should then be sealed with either an aluminum duct tape or at least tightly stuffed with a rag to reduce the amount of moisture entering the engine. Most of you are familiar with silica gel. It comes as a desiccant in many of the packaged items we receive in daily life. It has the characteristic of changing color as it absorbs moisture, making it easy to monitor, and can be dried in an oven for reuse when saturated. The degree and amount of silica gel you use will depend on the humidity in your storage environment. Remove the ignition batteries or starting batteries from the automobile and drain the fuel. Common motor fuel is a volatile cocktail of many chemicals to comply with today's environmental laws. Many of these chemicals can be damaging effects to your automobile if left stand for long periods of time. Many repair shops will not warranty the repairs if the gasoline in the automobile is more than 90 days old. Remove the gasoline from any automobile that is going to sit and use it in some other engine, but do not store it. This is not only a safety issue, but it's also relative to the preservation and running of your engines. Old gasoline will evaporate, leaving behind a residue of sticky glue-like substance commonly known as varnish, a substance that can cause valves to stick and bend push rods, carburetor valves to stick, and jets to plug. Other chemicals in gasoline can attack the soft metals that make up many of the components of your fuel system. After the final shutdown of the engine, drain all the fuel from the tank, open the carburetor, remove all of the fuel from inside of it, and blow out your fuel lines with air. Whenever using motor fuel, it is advisable to use a fuel stabilizer and a small amount of cylinder oil to preserve the fuel and lubricate the valves. To prevent some of these fuel issues, many have gone to using non-ethanol blended fuel that has an additive that can be responsible for water absorption into our fuel and save phase separation of the fuel itself. Ethanol can be responsible for damage to the rubber parts of your fuel system. Non-ethanol fuel is available for marine use, but is becoming harder to find in some areas. In northern Nevada, ethanol-free fuel can be purchased at one of our local chain stores and self-service travel stores, but only at some of their locations. Another trick is to use aviation fuel, 100 low lead, as a flushing agent during the last running of the engine. Aviation fuel has a much longer shelf life than regular motor fuel and contains fewer of the chemicals that give our older engines trouble. This will displace those last unreachable traces of motor fuel that are always left behind. Remember that marine fuel and aviation fuel are not legal to use on the road as they are not taxed for road use. Aircraft engine manufacturers recommend that engines being parked should be parked in such a way as none of the cylinders are at top dead center, and that the engine not be turned over again until you wish to place it back in service. Rotating the crankshaft will cause the protective coating of oil to be wiped off of cam lobes, lifters, and cylinder walls. Disconnect and remove the battery from the automobile. Even when shut off, a battery has electrical potential that can cause current to flow in the grounded components of your automobile, especially these older cars with positive ground electrical systems. This can also cause galvanic corrosion and electrolysis, as we've discussed how harmful that can be. Remove both cables from the battery, remove it from the car for storage and proper maintenance, or better yet, use in another car. Now it's time to drain that water-soluble oil mixture from the cooling system. While the engine is still warm, remove the upper and lower radiator hoses and any thermostats and heater hoses so that the last of the water within the system can evaporate out, leaving a coating of water-soluble oil behind to protect the water jacket and lubricate the water pump. The gearboxes, transmission, differential should be treated in much the same way as the engine. Though they are not subject to the internal pollution that internal combustion creates inside the engine, they can collect water and the lubricant can dry out over time as the lighter hydrocarbons evaporate. Open the lower drain plug on your gearboxes and inspect the fluid for water and consistency. Once satisfied with the contents of the gearbox, make sure it is properly filled with the correct lubricant Then seal it with silica gel as done with the engine. The aircraft industry has an aftermarket unit that, when plugged into the crankcase vents of your engine, circulates air through the engine and through a container of silica gel to maintain a dry environment within the engine. It's a rather expensive unit, but during my research I found plans for such a device that an individual made at home with an electrical outlet timer, an aquarium air pump, 2-liter soda bottle, some plastic tubing, rubber stoppers, and silica gel. I believe an industrious person could expand this device to include not only the engine but the gearboxes as well. I have a few copies of his plans if anyone is interested, and you can come by the museum and I'll dig you out a copy. The clutch on the automobile should be released. The clutch linkage should be blocked open in such a way to prevent the friction surface from remaining in contact with the flywheel and the pressure plate. Leather face clutches should be saturated with neat's foot oil. Other types should remain dry. Be certain which type you are dealing with. Leaving the clutch disengaged will prevent the friction disc from sticking to the flywheel or pressure plate and becoming damaged. Hydraulic brakes. Since 1939, nearly all automobiles manufactured come with hydraulically actuated brakes. For automobiles built in the United States, that means the use of DOT 3 brake fluid. If the brake system is working properly and not leaking, you may wish to simply flush out the old brake fluid with fresh DOT 3. But be warned, a characteristic of DOT 3 fluid is that it absorbs water. That water, once in the system, will cause corrosion in the brake lines and cylinders, leading to future failure of the system. Another characteristic of DOT 3 is that it will remove any paint it comes in contact with, which means that any leak can do a great deal of damage. It is recommended that you consider replacing the brake fluid with DOT 5 fluid. DOT 5 does not absorb water and will not damage paint. It will require that the brake system be flushed with alcohol, as the two fluids, DOT 3, DOT 5, do not mix. This is best done as part of a complete hydraulic overhaul of your brake system, replacing all of the rubber components and hoses. Something to consider. Another thing to consider, all hydraulically actuated power windows and convertible top assemblies built in the United States into the 1970s used DOT 3 fluid with the same ill effects. These systems should also be considered for a change of fluid, as a leak in one of these can damage the automobile's interior and paint job. However, DOT 5 is not a suitable replacement for hydraulic fluid in these systems, as it does not have the lubricating qualities necessary for the hydraulic pump that operate these systems. In these hydraulic systems, it has been recommended that ATF, automatic transmission fluid, be used. Where the automobile is to be stored will determine how the tires should be treated. If on display, you may wish to leave the automobile on the ground for easy movement and a more natural appearance. From time to time, tires that are left supporting the automobile will have to be turned to prevent flat spots. Tires can be lifted and automobiles supported on jack stands. Be sure to support the automobile under the axles or outer suspension points and use stands of a proper load rating. For longer term storage, the automobile can be lifted and supported by jack stands under the axle and by the chassis to relieve the springs. Be certain to always support the axles, as most automobiles, particularly post-war two-doors, are not designed to carry the weight of the axles hanging for a prolonged period of time. This can cause the automobile to bend in the middle, causing the doors to jam and the top to wrinkle. Tires should always be properly inflated so as to maintain their shape and to prevent the tubes from collapsing. With any automobile, and particularly with new acquisitions, or just any automobile that's history is unknown to you, you need to know what you are preserving. Inspect everything. Maybe you should just change all the fluids, flush all the systems. Not only is this good practice for storage of a vehicle, but it's also a good safety practice for bringing a vehicle back into service. Benchmark the condition of all of your automobiles and their systems. Write everything down for future references. Leave nothing to memory. Keep records. Tie a tag to the keys or the steering wheel. Many years ago, my sergeant told me that my equipment needed to be kept clean, dry, and serviceable. Your automobiles are no exception. Their preservation and continued reliable service require your attention. Once again, I'm Jay Hubbard. I'm the Automotive Collections Manager here at the National Automobile Museum, and we'll see you around the museum. Thank you.